Okay, in this video I'm going to use this web page I've already created. This is simply a centered div on the page, and I'm going to create a navigation bar that runs horizontally across the page. Couple of things that are worth noting. I'll just go through the page we've got so far. This is the page we're working with, and as you can see, we've got the head with 3 tags in there, title, meta, and link, and we've got our container div, and that's all this page consists of even. I can choose many words. There are many words I could have used. This is the CSS that relates to it. It sets the height of the document to 100%. It sets its body and everything else. And this is all to do with the video about centering divs on the center of the page. So you can see that that generates this document here. Okay, what we're going to do first of all is I'm going to introduce a series of divs in here. And all I'm going to do is put a div and put home, and the div here. I'm going to copy that and I'm just going to paste it 4 times so we can just get an idea of what this looks like. And if you're wondering why I'm using duck, swan and goose, we don't know each other well enough. There we go. So I've got the page there. Let's have a look at what that actually does. Press F5 and you'll notice I've only got home. And some of you may have noticed the page jumped to the side. If you weren't sure of that, I've actually got this running in 3 browsers to check that it's going to work in all 3. If I do that again, you'll notice it will jump to the side. That's because we've introduced a scroll bar here. What's happened is because of this line in the style sheet about height 100, all my divs are now 100% of the height of the document. Therefore, that presents my system with a slight problem and has created them all to have a height of 100%. So, first thing I need to do is resolve that. That means I've got to give everything a height in my document. So, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to introduce a class so that I can apply this class to each and every one of these buttons. Now, what's the difference between a class and an ID? Well, an ID can only appear in a web page once, but a class can appear one or many times. Question then is, why don't we just use classes all the time? And the answer is convention. It also means that if I validate my page and I've put ID, if by any chance it appears more than once, my validation will fail and I can trap the fact that I've put an error in there. But this allows me to apply the same style into all 4 of these. So what I'm going to do now is I'm simply going to resolve our height issue. To define a class, to define an ID, I put a hash. So to define a class, I put a full stop. That means class, and then I use the class name, which is nav button. I'm going to put its height, and we're going to say 40, let's say 30 pixels. And let's go for a border that runs around this of 1 pixel wide, a solid line, and black in color. End the brackets. Notice they're curly brackets, and that will have resolved that part. We can see that this runs across the page entirely. That's because I haven't given it a width, and therefore the browser has assumed I'm in 100%. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm now going to give it a width, and let's say 80 pixels, and that pulls that nicely into position. Let's just check it works in browsers, and we can see that in the 3 main ones, which is Google Chrome, Internet Explorer and Firefox, that looks exactly the same, and that's what you want. Okay, so we've got the nav buttons. They're appearing where we want, but the problem is that the natural behavior of any div is to close itself off. So once you've got the div, it forces any future div to appear underneath it, and so we get this column of divs. So how do I get these running alongside each other? Well, the answer is actually quite simple. All I've got to do is go to my class and introduce something called a float, and there are only 2 floats. There's float left and float right. Don't get confused with these. Float right will mean the object will float to the top of the web page and go to the furthest right it can do. In our case, a float right would take it to the right hand side of this div, and that's not what we want. We want our navigation buttons to be next to each other. So the float left works fine. it does that. Now, so far so good, but these aren't hyperlinked. Now what I can do is I can introduce the hyperlink inside. I'm only going to create the hyperlink to go to itself at the moment, so no issues there. And I'm going to put a title so that a little comment box will come up as well. I'm going to put that around there, and I'm going to just check. Now notice that's not affected the box, it's only affected the text inside. It's put a line underneath the standard line of HTML, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove that line. That requires a style sheet, and what I'm going to do is in this section, because this deals with all of my general HTML declarations, and then all I'm going to say is text decoration none. Now that will actually stop images from getting borders when you hyperlink those as well. And we can see that's disappeared. But again, it's still only the button that's actually hyperlinked. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to change where the hyperlink is. I'm actually going to put it around the box. And that means that that box, that div, will now become, so you can see that that happens. I'm going to leave the middle one, or that's not middle one exactly, but I'm going to leave that one exposed just to see what happens. And we can see that these are separated, they are separated divs. So there you go. Back to Firefox, F5, and you can see that now it's the whole, the hand appears as soon as I enter the box. It's not waiting for the text. Same thing with this one. This one's not hyperlinked, so nothing happens. But we have that one as well. So these are now hyperlinked. I can make that more enhanced by telling it under the style sheet what to do when my mouse goes over top. For example, I can introduce a .nav button. Now obviously it seems to be the same as above, but all I'm going to do is :hover. So what to do when I hover the mouse over top. And I'm just simply going to say background color hash, because I'm going to use hexadecimal coding, and I'm just going to choose 2 letters and a number that's within the hexadecimal range. So as long as it's a letter between A and F or a number between 0 and 9, it will give me that. This is just a random color. I'm not being fussy about it. Clearly, if you're designing, you will be. If I press F5, I can see now that I've actually got a color appearing in there. The fact is, it's actually applying it to the div itself, so it would happen to the one I haven't even hyperlinked. But that's alright. I can put up with that. Quite happy. There we go. Ooh, pretty. Okay. The only problem I've now got is I'm going to show you the next thing. What if I introduced a new div? I'm going to create a div. And I'm going to put some text here. Now, what I want with this text is I want this to be my main text area underneath the navigation buttons. And that's appearing up here, which is really frustrating. So what I can do is I need to solve this floating. So what I'm going to do to solve the floating is I need to use a special command here. Now that single line should follow any series of floats. If I do that, that clears, that stops the float from happening and forces divs from this point forward to follow the standard rule, which is to force it to a new line. That obviously has dropped all the way down here because height is 100%. So I've got to remember that I've got to set its height to 0 and sorted. So I've now got a navigation button at the top. I can put text underneath this and sort this all out, and that's not going to cause me any problems whatsoever. There's the navigation button. Using floats, you've seen the purpose of clear both. You understand now about the heights. Hope that's been useful. There you go.